Good afternoon. Welcome back to another episode of the Lord of the Rings LCG Progression Series. And today we're going to be talking about lore and quest guide for Over the Misty Mountains Grim. So, if you recall in the last quest, We Must Away Ere Break of Day, we covered the portion of the Hobbit from the Shire to the encounter with the trolls, the Shire being located on the map here. And heading east, the encounter with the trolls being located here. Now Over the Misty Mountains Grim covers the journey through the High Pass, located to the east of Rivendell. So, to start this quest, you get a short rest. After a refreshing stay in the House of Elrond, Bilbo and his companions resumed their quest for the Lonely Mountain, but to reach Erebor they first had to climb the High Pass over the Misty Mountains. When he peeped out in the lightning flashes, he saw that across the valley, the stone giants were out and were hurling rocks at one another for a game, and catching them and tossing them down into the darkness, where they smashed among the trees far below, or splintered into little bits with a bang. Then for Phase 3, the party is captured by goblins. In the books, the party of Thorin, Oakenshield, Bilbo, and the dwarves took shelter in a cave from weather and from the fight that the trolls were having with each other, or the game they were playing with the rocks. Unfortunately, the cave that they took shelter in had a secret passage in the back, which opened while they were sleeping, and out came goblins to capture them. Out jumped the goblins, big goblins, great ugly looking goblins, lots of goblins before you could say rocks and blocks. So, this quest has 3 phases. It is a little bit similar to Foundations of Stone in that you have a secondary encounter deck which activates at a specified point in the quest. The first part of the quest is the pass over the Misty Mountains in the High Pass. Once you proceed past Phase 2, then you will be using the second encounter deck after you've been taken captive down to Goblin Town. The setup for this quest, we start with 2 encounter decks but no additional setup cards on Phase 1A. We start with Bilbo Baggins under the player's control. And you can search your deck for 1 treasure card and add it to your hand. That will apply if you've gained the treasure cards from We Must Away Ere Break of Day. In a campaign in the saga, you'll be able to keep whatever treasure cards you get as rewards from previous quests. That'd be Glamchrist, or Glamdring, and Sting. Then for Stage 2A, which is the real setup phase, Stage 1 is a thematic stage where nothing really happens except the most minor setup instructions. And really, it's just there thematically to note the stay in Rivendell. Stage 2 is where the quest begins. When revealed, search the encounter deck for 1 copy of Stone Giant and add it to the staging area. Then shuffle the encounter deck, reveal 1 card per player from the encounter deck, and add it to staging. So that's a relatively formidable setup for a solo quest. You're guaranteed at least 4 threats starting against you, plus 1 encounter card, one example of which would be something like Lone Land, so that would start with 6 threat against you, and that's formidable for a true solo player, starting out with 6 threat against. definitely limits the hero combinations you can play. Because if you play a really low willpower combination, you're going to immediately take threat and have trouble. You could even potentially be approaching 40 in a couple of turns if you started with a really low willpower combination. And you don't really, in this quest, want to ever be engaging the stone giants. I can't see a reason why a player would ever want to do that. When you get to phase 3, you shuffle all encounter cards back into the encounter deck and set it aside inactive. The second encounter deck becomes the active encounter deck. So that means all cards that are on the table or in the discard pile go back into the encounter deck. So you don't have to kill the stone giant. It's just going to leave. It's not going to stay in the staging area when you proceed to phase 3. So even if you get multiple stone giants out of the deck, and you might, it's best just to ignore them, quest past them, get your 16 progress, and they'll go away. Which is thematically accurate, right? I mean, that's why the party took shelter in the caves. So that is the strategy I recommend. Don't try to engage the stone giant. Now, it does have text, a benefit that it can provide the enemy encounter deck from the staging area, which is, while at least one stone giant is in the staging area, the Galloping Boulders card gains Surge. So let's take a look at Galloping Boulders. Galloping Boulders. If this card should come out while there's a stone giant, the first player chooses a questing character. That character takes 3 damage and is removed from the quest, and it would gain Surge. You can run into a problem if you get a second stone giant from the deck. There are 3 in the deck. But only really because you'll have 8 threat against. It's not going to give double Surge. Though I think I may have played it that way in my video, but if I did, that was wrong. Because it adds additional threat, but not additional Surge. So, once you get past stage 2, all these cards, all the encounter cards get shuffled back into the encounter deck. And then you swap out for the new encounter deck, which is all about goblins. For the setup, you have to search the encounter deck for the Great Goblin. And the Great Goblin is a 15 threat boss with 5 attack, 2 shields, and 8 health. After the Great Goblin attacks, discard from the encounter deck, where X is the number of players in the game, and add each goblin enemy discarded by this effect to the staging area. And there are a lot of goblin enemies in this secondary encounter deck, so the odds are better than 50-50 that when you discard one card as a true solo player, you'll be adding another goblin to staging. You cannot defeat the stage until you defeat the Great Goblin. And while you when revealed, reveal 3 encounter cards per player. Bilbo Baggins may spend X resources to reduce the total number of encounter cards revealed by X to a minimum of 1. So if you're a true solo player, you would reveal 3 encounter cards unless you spend 2 Baggins resources, and then you'll only reveal 1. I strongly recommend saving 2 Baggins resources as a solo player so that you only reveal 1 encounter card. If you're in multiplayer and you're revealing 3 encounter cards per player, this is a more formidable challenge because you're not going to have enough Baggins resources in order to reduce the number of encounter cards to 1. Depending on how many turns you spent on the mountain pass will determine how many encounter cards you get in phase 3. If you advance very quickly, you'll get a lot of cards in phase 3. If you advance slowly, you'll get slightly less. But the caveat with advancing slowly is that you're increasingly likely to get more stone giants and increasingly likely to hit a threat threshold that will become a problem in terms of engaging enemies. So there's a good balance in this quest in decision making. I like the design of it. And it's nice to have a break in solo play. Usually true solo quests are much more difficult. This part at least is a little easier in true solo. Because no matter if you're playing one player or 4-player game, you only generate one resource on Bilbo per round. Once the Great Goblin is in the victory display, you only need 20 progress. There are some cards that gain an additional effect when the Great Goblin is in the victory display. For example, Great Cavern Room. When faced with the option to travel, if the Great Goblin is in the victory display, the players must travel to Great Cavern Room of Fable. That one's not that bad. There's a shadow card. It gives +2 attack if the Great Goblin's in the victory display. If the Great Goblin's in the victory display, this card gains Surge if it's revealed. So there's some additional effects after the Great Goblin dies. Still, you want to kill him as fast as possible. I don't think you really want to keep him alive on purpose until after defeating the quest. You would instantly win if you have 20 progress on the quest and the Great Goblin dies. But I don't think you need to be concerned about the order in which you do it. I would just kill the Great Goblin as soon as possible and then complete the quest, because he brings additional enemies into the game when he attacks pretty often in true solo and in really any mode of the game. However many players you're playing with, he's likely to bring a bunch of new enemies in the longer he's on the table, and you can get overwhelmed. So it's best to kill the Great Goblin as quickly as possible and don't worry about the additional effects that the encounter deck will bring, because in my experience the additional effects are not that big a deal. If you've gotten your board set up and killed the Great Goblin, you can deal with any additional effects from the Great Goblin being in the victory display, no problem. So the strategy for this quest: rush through phase 2 as fast as possible, and then in phase 3 take out the Great Goblin, and then you can just make 20 progress. You don't have to stabilize the board at that point, meaning you can just tank the enemies. You don't have to worry about whether you can kill them or not. Or you can if you feel the buildup is becoming a problem. But once the Great Goblin is defeated, 20 progress is very doable. This is not one of the more difficult quests, though there are a number of things that can go wrong. You can get overwhelmed in stage 1, or phase 2, by multiple stone giants, by something like guffawing of giants. The first player chooses one giant in the staging area. At the end of the quest phase, that stone giant engages the player with the highest threat. That can be a problem if you get it very early. If there are no stone giants in the staging area, search the encounter deck for one stone giant. So if you got those like back to back, you could be forced to engage 2 stone giants early, or engage 1 stone giant and bring another one out of the deck, and that can be a big problem. There are some things like overhanging rock will tempt you to use your Baggins resources early. While it's the active location, you can spend 1 Baggins resource to look at the top 2 cards of your deck. But if you do that, then you could end up revealing more cards from the deck in phase 3, and so I don't really recommend doing that unless you have an excess of Baggins resources. There's not much else in phase 2. It's just the stone giants and the crows for enemies, and supporting stone giant cards and locations. So you can get set up a little bit, but not a lot, because if you get multiple stone giants, it gets pretty difficult pretty fast. So it's best really to proceed through phase 2 as quickly as you can, and then phase 3. You can feint to control the Great Goblin a little bit. He's also not immune to attachments, so you can forest snare him, and that will stop him from attacking and trivialize phase 3 of the quest, if you're able to do that. So, not one of the more difficult quests, but as in all quests, there's a few things that can go wrong, and they probably will. They've gone wrong to me, especially when I was learning the quest. It's gone wrong for me, especially when I was learning the quest. It's almost always the case with Lord of the Rings, but relatively speaking, it's fine to bring like a dwarves deck or something that I would consider a little weaker in true solo. Though, of course, in multiplayer, dwarves are very powerful. So, thanks for watching.